Hi there, this is Andrew Burke, and I'm really excited to be taking part, at least virtually, in the Volta Generative AI mixer today. I had a last minute dental appointment showed up, and I have no idea what kind of state my mouth or my brain will be in this evening. So, in the interest of keeping things safe, I am recording things ahead of time, and I'm also going to stick this up on YouTube, maybe in case people are interested in seeing this later. Anyway, I've been really inspired by going to the other generative AI meetups previously that we've done, and I enjoyed them a lot. I found them really inspiring. It was really great to see what other people are working on in this area and using these tools to make interesting new stuff. And so I was inspired to start adding some Gen AI features to some of my own projects recently. So I wanted to share what I've been doing because it was inspired by the meetings at the salon, and hopefully it will encourage you to follow some of your own approaches and things. So today I want to talk about the platform I'm building this with, which is a platform we've been working with some other people and working on maybe licensing and selling around. It's called the Now Here platform. And I want to talk about a project I built with that platform called Bloomsday Halifax, which is launching in about a month on June 16th. And I want to talk about how I've been using generative AI to enhance some features and make this really interesting aspects of this Bloomsday Halifax project. And then I want to finish with a few insights on what I found doing this particular stuff. So a few years ago, in 2018, I worked with Halifax's Zupa Theatre on a big project called This Is Nowhere. And it was a bunch of hidden theatrical performances all scattered around downtown Halifax. And you would access them using a mobile app, which I built, which is done in React Native for iOS and Android. And it would give you clues and use the GPS to help you figure out where things are. And it would sort of manage all sorts of things. And it communicated with a backend system, which is a CMS and audience management system built in Ruby on Rails, because I'm one of those old Ruby on Rails hipsters from the mid 2000s. And anyway, so these two pieces turn out to be a really great combination for sort of interactive real world media. And part of the funding for this theater project depended on turning this into a platform. So we built a platform called Now Here, Experience, Time, and Place, which is a set of tools, the backend CMS and front-end components that could be used for other kinds of similar projects. We started really getting rolling, and even with COVID derailing a lot of things, we've now been using this on about 5 or 6 different projects over the years, including Ecology Action Center's 50 Things big art scavenger hunt that came out a few years ago, which was a big fun project for that. I've done a few little side projects, personal side projects over the years to try out different kinds of functionality. And this year I decided to take one of those side projects and make it a bigger deal. And that is Bloomsday Halifax. So before I was a computer nerd, I was a literature nerd, and one of my favorite books in undergrad was James Joyce's Ulysses. Now, there's a lot going on in this book. It's not to be confused with the Odyssey, which is something quite different, but this is Ulysses, which is refers to the Odyssey a bunch, but is not about ancient Greece. In fact, it's basically deep down, with a lot of other things on top, a bunch of people walking around Dublin, Ireland on specifically June 16th, 1904. And every year since, on June 16th, people all go to Dublin and retrace the steps of the various characters around town. And there's performances and readings, and people get to wear hats and dress up, and there's a lot of drinking of Guinness and Jamesons and stuff. But one of the main characters was named Leopold Bloom, and so this day has become known as Bloomsday. And it's wider than just Dublin now. It happens in New York, Melbourne, Montreal, Paris. I've been to a few of these Bloomsday events when I was living in Toronto. And when I moved to Halifax, I thought, we should really have a Bloomsday here in Halifax, because it'd be an interesting thing to do in a city that has so many academics and people like that. But we also have a very similar architectural history to Dublin. In fact, here's a Martello Tower we have in Point Pleasant Park, and here's a Martello Tower that is the opening scenes of Ulysses take place in a similar tower in Dublin. We also have lots of street names that are quite similar. Here's also the General Post Office in Dublin and Province House, very similar styles. We have street names are similar. We have lots of Irish people and a lot of Irish pubs, and it seems like a no-brainer to have a Bloomsday event here. And nobody else seemed to be doing it. Now, I'm not a great organizer of big events with like actors and musicians and stuff, but I can build software. So I've been working on this, and I have now built an app called Bloomsday Halifax. And it's a React Native app for iOS and Android. It has the same Ruby on Rails CMS on the back end. It's a location-based scavenger hunt, a little bit like a literary nerd version of Pokemon Go. So here's a quick overview of the app. Each episode in the book, there's 18 chapters, each is its own episode, has a location in Dublin, and I've done a parallel locations in Halifax. You can see the map, I'm covering it slightly, but you can see sort of where that little hats are. Those are the locations in Halifax. And if once you pick a location, you'll then get a map that shows you where it is, and you can walk there and shows you the distance and the direction. And once you're there, it unlocks a bunch of content. So you can get a summary of the chapter, you can get excerpts from the text of the chapter, there's information about the locations. You can also find things. So it's a little bit like a loot box from a video game. Each location has a bunch of different items, and you're randomly picked one for each location. So each person taking part in this, if you're traveling with other people, you'll notice you all have different items collected at the end of the day, which I find kind of cool. So these are items that feature in the book that people are carrying around with them and things like that. And it's kind of a fun way. I also, by the way, used DALL-E for a bunch of these images. And if you tell it to be black and white, like an old engraving, it gets rid of that weird glowy look that makes everything look really obviously like an AI picture. So it's actually kind of been useful for collecting these things. A mixture of my own work and some clip art and stuff I found off the internet and DALL-E work as well. Anyhow, I also wanted to have special experiences happening at each location that try to bring the world of the book into the real world in various ways. Some of these will be interactions with the real world, where maybe the special at the pub is the Gorgonzola cheese sandwich that they mentioned in the book, or maybe you'll be given direction to ask at a counter at a store, and they'll give you a special card that's printed that's a card that's the kind of thing you'd see in the book as well. But some are going to be very specifically software-based in the app itself. And finally, this is where generative AI comes in. Everyone's asking, where did the generative AI come in? Well, here it is finally. And this is one of them. It's the personal Penelope at the end. So the final chapter of the book is called Penelope. And it's written from the point of view of Molly Bloom, the wife of the person named Bloomsday after, who is falling asleep. It's 3 a.m, and you know how your mind sort of wanders when you're on the edge of sleep and you just sort of free associate and all these different thoughts sort of pile together on top of each other. Well, this is what Joyce, who's always doing interesting experimental things with language and narrative, does here. So it's about 30-40 pages of just raw text with no punctuation or anything, and it's just flows and flows, and the ideas bounce around and shift from one to the other without any clear delineation. There's no punctuation. She has her own strong kind of salty personality that really shows through, but it's also this really kind of interesting poetic flowing kind of language. It's very distinctive and unique. Well, in the app, once you've finished all the other things that you were going to do that day, ideally, once you've gone home and gone to bed, you're in bed at home and you're about to go to sleep, you can open this final chapter and you hit the button at the bottom, generate your personal Penelope, and it will create, using GPT 4o, a unique customized narrative of your day that's in the same style as the book. So here's an example of a test run I did on the weekend. Sorry, it's kind of small. I'm still adjusting the font sizes. We're just doing some testing right now. We're going to be doing a lot more adjustments before it goes live in about a month. You can't really see that there, but here's some of it. So on the left side, you can see the original text from the book, some of it. And on the right side, but just behind me, is the generated text in the book, where it's talking about picking up, various items, like an article about foot and mouth disease and some potted meat and things like that. But it actually has a very similar flow to it. I think it kind of works. It works quite nicely, actually, much better than I'd expected in many ways. Everyone gets their own customized text at the end of the day based on what they actually did during their wandering about. And it's written in pretty close, not perfect, but pretty close to the proper style. Now, I could not have done this manually. You can imagine me frantically typing things for everyone as they finish these things. And who knows how many, we might get dozens or hundreds of people using this. So this only could have really worked with generative AI, and only really would have worked acceptably well with generative AI probably in the last 6 months or so. It definitely would not have worked previously. So I'm just going to show you how this works. So the app sends a request to the server, which is a Rails server, which eventually runs this little bit of Ruby code, which collects the activities of the day, or we can inject an alternative for testing, and puts them into this prompt. And it sends this to the OpenAI API, which returns a response, which we extract in the content and send it back to the app. So here's the prompt. The context is you are Molly Bloom, the character from the novel Ulysses. You write in a free-form digressive stream of consciousness style with no punctuation, line breaks, or paragraph breaks, like in the famous final Penelope chapter of Ulysses. You're a bit salty and lusty, living in a physical world. You're not very poetical and a bit grumpy about things. You're on the verge of going to sleep and your mind is wandering. And here's the prompt. Narrate most but not all of the following activities in a stream of consciousness style as if on the verge of going to sleep. There's the injector for the list. Interject with yes every so often. Start with the whole text with yes and finish it with yes, I will, yes. Expand on the basic activities with free-form associations suitable for your character and let your mind wander. Before and after the list of activities, free-form talk about your feelings or your memories of singing or of your youth in Spain. So this was an interesting progress. I started working on this about 6 months ago, but I actually evolved with the evolution of ChatGPT. So I started with using 3.5 and it kind of worked, but it was extremely literal and it kept trying to turn it into a term essay. It kept sort of saying, and this is a metaphor for how James Joyce reacted in Ulysses. And it was really annoying. I kept having to try to turn that off and it never quite worked. Version 4, GPT-4, was a big step up. The language was much better. It actually felt like it was feeling like poetry and it was getting some metaphors and allegory. The thing was, it started costing a lot. Even, I mean, I'm not doing this to make any money. I'm not charging any money for this event. It's a passion project. But it started, I could see the cost really adding up just from testing. So, there's a thing to think about. But also, it was a bit slower. And the hosting I've got set up with the Rails app on Heroku has a 30-second timeout. And so it would sometimes start bumping into that timeout, which is really embarrassing. But just last week, OpenAI came out with GPT-4o, which actually is great. It's basically the same linguistically, so it's got the poetry and everything, but it's way faster and significantly cheaper as well. So it turns out to be the perfect option just in time for me to work on it. So there's no reason you shouldn't be using 4o now if you're doing anything with OpenAI tools. And there's a few other ones I'm hoping to do down the line that I haven't done yet, or I've done halfway, that I'm hoping to integrate before the thing goes live next month. One of the chapters has this weird sort of scientific Q&A kind of approach, which I thought really felt like a ChatGPT kind of session where you ask it a question, it gives you an answer, and it's sort of sometimes tiresome, but it kind of works. I actually made a GPT when they announced those a while back. The Joycean Ithaca Catechism is what I called it. And here you can see some back and forth. It's not great, but it's an interesting start. It sort of does some interesting things. I've also thought about having it manage and massage pictures. You could send it a picture or something and it would then make a weird grotesque. So there's a chapter called Kirke that is about basically it's all metamorphosis and surreal hallucinogenic stuff where everything changes shape and changes identity and everything. And I thought it would be great. We could send a picture and it would morph it into something weird. And I hadn't been able to get that to work properly, but just yesterday on GPT-4o, I was able to get it to actually take a picture and convert it. However, what it looks like it does is it takes your picture, describes it, uses that description as a prompt for a new picture along with your additional stuff. So you can see it's a runner in a gray shirt, but it's definitely not me. Anyhow, really weird, could be cool. The jankier and weirder the image processing is, actually the better for this particular context. So I'm looking forward to running with that. Anyhow, finally going to wrap up with some insights. I know I'm running a bit over. So anyhow, insights. It's much easier than expected to do this kind of integration, these API integrations, especially with the OpenAI stuff. If you're worried about it being too complicated, if you've ever done API calls before, it's as simple as that. It's like getting a map information or other things like that, or weather off of a weather site into your app. I did try a few things with Hugging Face. I wasn't able to get those working very well. I'm more of a programmer than an admin guy, and I kept bumping into error messages, but I'm going to give that another try down the line because I got some other projects that might be useful. But really, if you're worried that it's going to be too complicated, the API integration is really, really straightforward if you do any programming at all. So give it a shot. Don't be afraid to. Insight. Generative AI is better when it's not actually a chatbot. In this project, I'm not having people type back and forth with questions and answers and getting answers. We're instead taking the context of what you did and putting a language layer in front of it. This actually makes it more impactful and also makes it a whole lot safer. It helps keep the focus too. Chats can get off the rails, especially when you have any random public member of the public start chatting with it, and people will go and try to break it. And there's all sorts of weird ways to break chats these days. I keep thinking of Air Canada and New York's recent fiascos where they used chatbots as their front end of their helpline, and of course it starts gleefully giving you wrong answers. Well, we don't need facts because this is a work of fiction anyway, so we don't need to worry about that. But also just making, even if you are dealing with real world stuff, I found a lot more impact can be done by just putting a language layer in front of some preset facts. In fact, one of the few documented great uses that people have all agreed is an awesome use for language models that's out there in the world that actually seems to be really making an impact, that's not just hype, is Yahoo Fantasy Football has uses a language model to create snarky little summaries of people's favorite fantasy football leagues. So here, for example, it says, the Brady Bunch should use week 11 to consider life's great mysteries, like why abbreviation is such a long word. It would be better than checking fantasy football that week. And so once again, it's taking data from the back end and putting a front end on it with language, which is, I think, going to be one of the more useful ways to work with language models moving forward. I think the chat thing is too chaotic and too risky in many ways, and it shows too many of the failures. But I think this data with a friendlier front end might be a really interesting direction. And a final insight, what would Joyce think? I agree that some people who are big Joyce scholars might think this is kind of blasphemous, and certainly a lot of artists have had a lot of issues with what generative AI has been doing over the years. But I think making it a piece of a larger art project, I think, is useful. Now, also, Joyce was one of the great prose stylists in the English language. He's a really great writer. And it feels a bit weird to use a language model just to sort of ape his style in a loose way. But he was a big fan of technology and experimentation and trying to find new ways to express using technology. He was always playing with different genres and expectations. And in fact, he was so into new technology and new forms of narrative that he was a big partner in the first cinema in Ireland in 1909, and it was called the Volta cinema, which I think is really cool for our Volta AI meetup. Anyhow, thank you so much. That was a quick tour of my project. And if you're interested, check it out at bloomsdayhalifax.ca. There's free registration. It's not going to charge for this. There's no way I could. Here's a QR code to also get to it. And it's June 16th, 2024. It's a Sunday. If you're interested at all, you don't have to have read the book or understood it to be able to get something out of this project. You don't have to do all 18 locations. You can drop by and try a few things in the app. Give it a shot. Let me know what you think, and hopefully I might be around for some questions, or drop me an email. There's info@bloomsdayhalifax.ca will be enough for some of that, and maybe I can show up for the next salon when my mouth is feeling better and I can actually hopefully take part in things. So hope you had a good time with that. I'm looking forward to hearing what you all think, and enjoy the rest of the evening.